Well, you can see I've got the engine slung, and what I've done, I've gone up the shed, gone up to where the lathe and the milling machine and that are, and I've made a couple of bolts that fit into the stand here, so they fit in through here. They're a nice snug fit with a half UNC thread. And I've also made adapters, and the adapters are 3/8 UNF, fit in there, there we go, 3/8 UNF, and they'll screw into the block here. If there's not enough thread in the block, we'll just have to put a washer under it. Yeah, which is what we're going to do. We're going to leave the thread long for other applications. And then, yeah, the idea is that this bolt here screws into there. We spread them out as far as we can, get as wide a grip as we can on it, and away we go. So we should be able to turn it around then and tip him upside down, and well, we'll take the crank out. We'll knock the pistons out, take the crank out, and hopefully on this stand here we can give it a wash and measure the bore and do all that sort of stuff. Well, there you go, the engine's in the stand. Now, this is a Blue Point stand that I've had. It's a cheap end to snap on if there ever is such a thing. But look, they're a great stand. I've had big 6-cylinder Perkins on them, and I've had a 466 Bedford on it, believe it or not, but we can turn it up and down for filming and all that, so we're all set up. What we'll show you at this stage is when we hone in on that number 3 conrod there. So we'll come in if we can, try and get a bit of focus happening. And just on the caps here, there's a number 3 on the top and the bottom cap, or it's on the cap and the conrod, and that is away from the camshaft. And so it's on the oil filter side, would be another way of saying it, I suppose. You can see the oil filter housing in the shot there. And so that's something to take note of. If an engine hasn't got a piston that's already numbered, there's nothing wrong with putting a couple of centre pop marks or centre punch marks on them and taking note whether it's left or right or something like that. So I can't seem to get into a nice I think you can just see the number 3 there. But yeah, just something to take note of at this stage. Take note of where you are and what you're doing with it, and a little bit of thought now will help a lot. I've got a heap of junk over and way over there. Yeah, that's from when we pulled the engine out. I haven't tidied that up yet, but I probably won't until I get this block apart and we can measure the crank and do all that sort of thing. So stay tuned. We'll undo some conrod nuts and we'll get the we'll get it to start the disassembly anyway. Okay, I've zoomed in a little bit. Now we're going to undo the conrod nuts on number 3. Now the reason I'm doing number 3 first is just out of interest. We know the oil pressure on this engine was dropping away on us, and so we're expecting a worn crank or worn bearings. And the oil pumps right up the front of the engine, so this is probably going to be the worst one. Not the main so much, as the main gets the oil and then the oil comes down the journal to the big ends. So they're 11/16 those nuts. I'll just put the nuts back on so I don't lose them. Oh, and often to get the caps off you can actually use the nuts. So there's the cap off. Now let's have a look. A look at the bearing. That is surprisingly good. I was expecting to see the white metal worn and a copper backing. So we can pop these bearings out. And what I'm looking for on the back of the bearing is a part number or an 010, 020, something like that written there. Okay, this has STD, so it's a standard crank. So that tells us that these big end journals have not been ground at all. They're still standard. And look at that bearing, that's in pretty good nick. I've got a feeling this engine got done up, but then through neglect it got dusted. So anyway, that's a bit of a surprise to me. I expected to find more wear there. So I'll pull the other con rods off and I'll just poke this back there just so we know where it goes. I'll get these other ones off and I'll have a look there too. And see if I can actually see. Yeah, we can just see number one. But sometimes, as soon as I get the pistons out, I put the caps back on again. Sometimes I don't. It's probably good practice too if you're going to use the bearings again, which we don't. We don't want to use them. I'm wondering with the low oil pressure, seeing the pistons, or the bearings are so good, whether they did the engine and didn't put the oil pump in. So we'll have to pop the oil pump apart shortly and have a bit of a look. Oh, you can nearly reuse them. Yeah, that crank feels really good, believe it or not. But yeah, those bearings are okay. All right, I'll turn off for a sec. I'll drop the other ones out, and when we come to popping the pistons out, I'll turn the engine over so you can see them coming through. Well, I've taken number one cap off, and you can feel the groove here. And look at the scoring in that bearing. Looks like it's had a big hunk of shit come out the hole and score round and round and round. That may have been on a previous rebuild, but the oil pump brings oil up, shoots it into here, and then it disperses around. So being towards the front here, this one would be one of the early ones to get the oil. Let's see if I can get you a better look at this. Yeah, you can sort of see it. I've got too much light happening in here today, which I've got lots of light for filming, but sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. And there's actually pits. You can see little pits through here, and that looks like it's been rubbish when it's been assembled. You know, little bits of pitting in the bearing. So number one on the crank doesn't feel real good. So now what we can do now is wind the engine over, and what happens is all the pistons go down as far as they can go. And so I'll try and turn him around so you can see what's happening. you can actually see the pistons in the bores. See the conrod hanging down. See that's clear of the crank now. So what we used to do, and I don't know if you should do it like this or not, we used to just use the hammer handle. Get the handle of your hammer and just give him a bump. Take the bearing out. Bearing comes out sometimes, other times it doesn't. And sometimes you bugger your hammer handle a bit, and once upon a time I used to actually go and buy a shovel handle, and we'd chop the shovel handle off up into lengths probably so long, and we just punch down on the piece of shovel handle. Nice and soft, and you didn't wreck your hammer handle. So I'll go and find something other than a hammer handle so I don't wreck it, and we'll bump a few pistons out. Well, I went and had a look and I found an old mop with the handle broken on it. It was an old mop handle, so I nicked it. So look, what we do now, we try and centralise the conrod. There you go. Lucky that didn't fall on the ground, I suppose. What I didn't mention was if you have a big lip on top of the bore, like I said, there's no lip here hardly. You may have to remove the lip or get rid of the lip first, but I didn't have to with this. That's one piston assembly out. Now the rings are very sharp, which is a sign of a worn engine. It's got the old style oil control ring here. Probably the new set of rings will be a cast one the same as this lower one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a 5-ring piston. So we'll wash all this up and we'll go through the process of measuring it up. Chances are I'm not going to use it. I'll probably put new pistons and rings and the whole lot in, but yeah, look, we're filming it, we're showing how it's done, so let's do the whole show. Right, all the pistons are now out, and to remove the crank we need to undo all the main bearing caps. But before we do that, we need to remove the rear seal housing. Now this engine has a rope rear seal. If the engine number had an L on it, finished with a DL, you would have a lip rear seal. But this is just a D, so it's a rope rear seal. So these housings get done up incorrectly and get warped and all sorts of things, these little alloy housings. It's in 2 halves. You have an upper and a lower half. And by undoing these bolts here, just the 2 through, you can actually lift this rear bearing cap. But I don't do that, I pull it all separately. Big long bolts. Good job for a nut gun, this little bit, but anyway. So we've got the 2 main clamping bolts undone. Now these blokes have real thin little heads on them again, so make sure your spanner's in a good nick. This old girl I've had for years, she's a bit sloppy on the head, but I don't know, you have some spanners that you like. I'll just drop them all in the pot for the moment. Alright, we'll undo this one. Sounds like they're slashing the paddock next door. We'll have a slasher in the background all day. This mightn't be real good for filming, but anyway, you don't listen to that bit. Oh, Kelly dog's looking. She says, "I'll get that bastard. Where is he?" And then once again, there's three more nuts under there. Now, to get that off, sometimes a little lip here you can just touch the lip on, but I don't seem to be today, so I usually try and find it and just go gentle, no need to flog shit out of it. There we go, and there's the bottom, and that's a rope seal through here, and it usually has a little gasket on there. So same process. I'll just undo the 3 bolts for this other section. I should have that right out of the way. Right, well now we've got all this rear engine seal out, I've just undone the bolts here for the main bearings. Now the main bearing caps have 1, 2, 3 and 4 from the front back. If you haven't got that on your engine, take a moment and put it on there. Even if you have the number 2 bearing cap on the number 2 spot, but you have it back to front, when you tighten that down, the engine will lock up. Same with the conrods. If you have number 3 on number 3, but you don't have the 2 number 3s that we saw before lined up, you'll nip it up and the engine will stop turning. So take note of these little things. They do help. Now usually I leave the bolts in these, and you can rock them back and forth and use them as a handle. Now that bearing, you can feel some wear on that main. But sometimes if it's an old engine, you will have more wear on the main, because a lot of people just drop the sump off and put a new set of big ends in, which may have happened here, who knows. So we'll just drop them down into our pot. Whoop, look at that, automatic. That's your front one. That feels pretty good. The centre one. That's okay. I might zoom this out a bit. I'm concerned you're missing out on some of that there. And you'll notice on the bearings there's a little tag there, stops them from turning. On most engines, conrods and all, there's another one down in the block here. They always go together. You'll see a little shadow mark for those. So another thing we can do at this stage is roll the bearing shell out. And once again, we're looking for STD or 010, or if it's just got a part number without any numbers, you can presume it as standard. Yeah, so this doesn't have STD or any numbers like that on it. It has 311, 21221, and it doesn't have STD or 010, 020. So if this crank was ground, all oversized bearings have 010 for 10 thou, 020 and all that. So this hasn't got that, so we're presuming it hasn't been ground. And this back one, it's usually a little bit tighter. It has thrusts. I don't know if you can see a little tag just there, but I'll show you once I get it off. Quickest way to get an itchy nose is have hands like that. Right, now that's the rear main, and you have a thrust. Now some of the thrusts you'll notice have a steel back. The steel back goes to the housing, and the soft babbitt metal, the crank turns on that, and you have your two little oil grooves here. So we have the thrust washer sitting there. You can get oversized thrusts if you need them from time to time. Now turn the crank there now, and there's that other thrust. It turns out, and you'll notice the thrust on the cap side has a tag to stop it turning, and the thrust on the bottom doesn't have a tag. It just sits there, and because this top one can't turn, it can't turn either. So the bottom one has no tag, and that crank should just lift out. There you go. And that's the rear thrust. Alright, we'll give everything a bath. I might go up the other shed and get my micrometers and bits and pieces, and we'll run through checking the wear on the crank, and we'll clean the block and do the bore and all that sort of thing.